In this week's episode, I'm joined by Sandy Diaz Haley, she, her, founder and principal of SDH Communications, and also founder of TBC, the Badass Collective, a professional networking community. In this special episode, Sandy and I chat about change management through a DEIB lens. Join us as we discuss Sandy's 5 key elements of communicating DEIB for change, including audience, tone, timing, channels, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm delighted to have you here, and I really enjoyed meeting you at the conference in Dallas a few months ago. So thank you for joining me, and I would love for folks to get to know you a little bit. So please tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. So I have 20 plus years of strategic communications experience. Spent a lot of that time working for global PR agencies or whatnot. Spent a lot of that time working in Latin America. I'm originally from Lima, Peru, so that was certainly a lot of fun. And then back in 2017, I found myself working in-house at a mortgage servicer, of all things, taking on a strategic communications, sort of digital communications in-house role. And that was just a really interesting time because the company was going through a rebrand. And then also it was during 2020, right? There was everything that happened in 2020. There was the murder of George Floyd. There was the fact that this is the mortgage industry. And there were also, 3,000 new employees that were hired to service loans, right? In 2021. So really interesting time. By the time I left that organization, I was the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And that was the end of 2022. And, a lot of things have changed when it comes to DEIB. The organization, kind of reorged when it came to how they wanted DEIB support. And I kind of found myself going, I kind of want to do this on my own. And so that is how SDH Communications came to be. So it's been a little over a year and a half, and I'm really focusing on strategic communications in addition to, internal communications, helping to create employee experiences, employee engagement, building corporate storytelling. So kind of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But yeah, that's just kind of a little bit about me.
I love that. I love that. And I know that you're a new member of the change agencies. Can you talk a little bit about what that organization does?
Well, first of all, I have to thank you for that because Bernadette, what you were able to do was introduce me to someone, John, who is someone you've known for some time, who also is based in Chicago. And
shout out to John Avila.
Thank you, John Avila. You brought us together, Bernadette, and we just really hit it off and we had a great conversation. We both spent time at Edelman and we were kindred spirits, and he filled me in on what the change agencies was, what they were all about. And I was able to get plugged in, and now I'm a part of the organization. So essentially it is a collective. So it's a national network of independently owned communication agencies that focus on inclusive and authentic communications to multicultural and LGBTQIA communities. And so what that really means is we're also all independently owned, but also we are all either people of color or people that are part of the LGBTQIA community. So it's just a very eclectic group. We're very diverse. We're very intentional. But when we're putting strategies together, it comes from a very deliberate authentic place because we are a part of those communities that we're serving and connecting with. So
Mm. I love that because, it should never be with us without us, right?
exactly.
So when we're talking about DEIB communications, are we talking about internal employee communications or external or sort of how is it different? Should it be different? Talk a little bit about that.
My answer is no. It shouldn't. And not even when it comes to DEIB communications, I'm talking about communications in general too. We need to really think about it through the lens of where we are today, right? And social media and the access that people have. Whatever you put out internally will get out somehow externally,
Mhm.
even when you think it won't. Internal memos, whatever they may be, there's always an opportunity that those can go out. And at this point,
Mm.
can't really call DEIB communications because it's not. Because if you look at the landscape, everybody is diverse for
Right.
whatever reason. So it's so much more than that. I think internal is external, external is internal. Part of what SDH communications is all about is really making sure that you are aligned from the inside out, that your organization is aligned from the inside out. So
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that, yeah, I mean, how many times have we seen an internal employee memo leak? So, you know, certainly seems to be common, especially the past few years. So that makes a lot of sense. You know, what are some of the common pitfalls of DEIB communications or communications in general? It seems like there would be a lot of potential room for error here.
well, first of all, I kind of going back to my first point, it can be very siloed. And that's
Mm,
exactly what we don't want. And it's
mm,
funny for me to say that because I'm the one that was kind of, laid off and impacted, my role by an organization that reorged and, kind of changed what they were doing from a DEIB perspective. But part of me is like, maybe that's how it should be, right? Maybe you shouldn't have very dedicated roles. I don't know. And I go back and forth on that, right?
mm,
I just think that DEIB communication should be the lens of everything, through the lens of everything that you
mm,
do. It shouldn't be siloed. You shouldn't have one team that their responsibility is to work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It should be something that your entire organization does, right? It should be part of your core values. It's everybody's responsibility.
mhm.
That's the first one, the silos. I think, leadership buy-in is also really important. If your leaders don't believe in it, this is again going back to it starts from the inside out.
Yeah.
Then it's not authentic because if there's not buy-in from them, then no one else is going to follow, right?
Mhm.
It's also not a problem to solve, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
We all have to have a growth mindset. We all have to know that we are constantly shifting and learning no matter what. I mean, if you think about what's happening with AI right now, we're all having to learn and adapt to how technology is going to continue to change and shift our lives, just like we did 20 years ago when we were like, what's this AOL internet thing?
Mhm.
So we're always going to be evolving and changing and growing. So DEIB is not a problem to solve.
Mm,
Um, so I would say those are kind of the main kind of key factors, and also not having what does success look like, right? How can you make something measurable? What are
mm.
your goals? No matter what that is, there are always benchmarks or something you can use to really track how you are or are not moving the needle. Those are some of the common pitfalls.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that you're right, is that this DEI lens needs to be brought into every function, not just communications, but every function. I mean, that's the whole premise of my book, Inclusive 360, is that when we embed equity and inclusion, that becomes the default, well, then there's less likely for human error, right? When we have it as part of the structure and just the way things are done because it's the right thing to do and it makes business sense, then it just becomes normal, right? And that's sort of where I think we need to be getting to.
That's right.
So let's get into actually the sort of 5 tips here. I know so this, folks, this is a sort of a non-traditional episode of 5 things in 15 minutes. I just got back from vacation and I don't have 5 good vibe stories to share with you, but Sandy, of course, is full of good vibes.
I'm using
And
vibes. This is it.
that's right. That's right. So let's get into this week's 5 things is really about 5 tips from Sandy on effective DEIB communication. So let's get into that. Sandy, what's number 1?
Number one is know your audience. Who is your audience and what's in it for them?
Mm,
If we're all honest with each other as humans, we all want to know what's in it for us when we're reading something or finding out new information. How is this going to impact me? That's important. And looking through that lens when you are communicating anything is taking into consideration who are these people? What do they know to be true? How can we give them a reason to believe? You know, and why does it matter to them? So, and that's going to be different. If you're talking about an organization as a whole, that's why saying DEIB communications is, can't live in a silo. Because you're talking about an organization, think about those that are neurodiverse, think about those that are working parents, think about there's just the list is endless. You really need to think about who those people are and give them a reason to believe.
that makes sense. And I think that it also means that in order to effectively know who those people are, we need to have them on our team so that we can then effectively represent those voices externally. Right. So that's sort of both sides of things. Excellent. And tip number 2.
Think about who is delivering your message and the tone and the timing. You need to be sensitive to, are there things out there that maybe people are really anxious about? What if it's, the upcoming election, or potentially there's the holiday, religious holiday that you hadn't considered? And who is delivering the message is also important, because it might not always be the leader that typically sends a message, or maybe it does need to be the CEO because this is a very important message. It's just there's just so many factors to consider, but you have to be mindful and deliberate about how that message comes across and from who.
It seems, I mean, intention is so key here, right? So, how do you coach clients to sort of figure out who is the right communicator of this message?
Yeah. So like I was saying, it's difficult because sometimes what if there's something that perhaps you counsel your client and say, you know what, this shouldn't come from your CEO. This should come from your chief financial officer because of X, Y, and Z reason.
Hmm.
Well, it might be that people say, well, if it's not coming from the CEO, then it doesn't seem as important,
Mm,
right? Why is it
yeah,
coming from this other person? So it's really dependent on the organization, how they're structured, what the dynamic is, how they're typically used to receiving information, who sends the information. Again, there's so many nuances there. You just have
fair
to
enough.
really think through all the options. And the other thing really is it can't just be a silo. You've got to ask other people's opinions as well.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. Well, so folks can actually hire you to coach them and guide them through this process directly. I just want to make sure I make it clear that you are very much hireable by organizations that are looking to do this right. Okay, let's move on to tip number 3.
Tip number three, this one seems so simple, but we kind of forget because a lot of times when we're thinking about, working in corporate America or whatnot, we don't think that not all employees and not all folks have access to email, right? And so thinking really carefully about what channels are you using, right? So think about what if you have distribution sites, right? And what if those folks don't even have employee emails, right? What if you need to think about relaying that message on tabletops, or those kinds of things? What if it's scanning a QR code for them to see the information? Taking all those things into consideration, and also along those lines, is to never underestimate the power of in-person connections and interactions. I think we take that for granted nowadays because we can do this and this is so normal to us. We're like, oh, hey, Bernadette, where still people really need that face-to-face interaction.
I love that. I mean, I think that that's something that I didn't even really think about, but obviously, folks in the field, manufacturing sites, they don't always get this, right? So I love the QR code idea. That's really clever. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The channels make a lot of sense. What about number 4?
Okay, this probably is my favorite because I've seen this happen before and I've seen it backfire. And that is to ask for and listen to feedback. Because the worst thing you can do is ask for feedback and then not do anything with the information that's been provided to you. That is the biggest mistake you can make. If people are taking the time to say X, Y, and Z, how can you act on it? If you want to build trust and credibility, you give people the opportunity to provide that feedback, and also it gives them some accountability, right? So you always want to ask for it, but then do something about it.
Yes. I mean, I am guilty of that. So I appreciate the reminder because I don't always integrate, and I think that no, I really appreciate that. Number 5.
The last one is to really think about when you're putting news out there, it should be more than just sharing information. Like, this is what I want you to know, this is what I want you to believe, and this is what I want you to do. It should also be about, I consider myself a corporate storyteller, but it should be about celebrating wins and successes. So don't just stop there with saying, this is the news and that's it. So you should never stop with the storytelling. Don't stop communicating how the thing that you put out there has changed things, how it has shifted things, how it has made things evolve. Share those updates. It can't be a one and done. This is it. We did it. It's over. We announced it. Done.
Yeah, and I think especially for long-term projects, DEIB projects, anything that's change management, I mean, people need that can be really stressful. It can be really intense. People need those wins to celebrate, to keep going, to keep momentum, to stay focused on the why. So I think that's just a really important way to end, way to sort of final tip, because folks, we need that, especially when there are so many competing priorities, and DEIB often feels like an extra.
Progress over perfection, right?
That's right.
There you go.
That's exactly right. Before we close, there's just been a shift from my perspective over the past couple of years on how organizations are talking about social issues. It seems like when the Supreme Court stripped away reproductive rights and affirmative action, there was perhaps less outrage than from corporate America than I may have expected. We saw some organizations cave
Mhm.
to pressure. And so I'm wondering what you think the role of messaging and how organizations should be talking about issues of what I consider to be corporate social responsibility at the end of the day, because these are things that directly impact people.
No, you're absolutely right. They do. So I think kind of at a larger kind of, when you think about it from the larger perspective, do the issues that are being potentially impacted align with your company values, right?
Mm.
If they do, there's more of an opportunity. If it's just to
Mhm.
jump on the bandwagon and say something because everyone else is, that's not authentic, right?
Mhm.
You really have no place to do that. So I would say from a larger perspective, I would lead with that. When it comes to sort of employee experience and employee engagement, I'm a big believer in empowering your people leaders.
Mm.
So equipping them with the right messaging, and it's never going to be perfect, right? But equipping them with the right messaging to make sure that those that do feel anxiety or they're anxious about whatever it may be, that they feel like they're in a psychologically safe environment where they can have conversations, to a degree, right? We have to be careful with how that goes, but to have those conversations. So empowering your people leaders to feel comfortable, and then really just being very cognizant of the timing of these things.
Mm.
These are going to be moments in time where we're going to need to be a little bit more aware and alert and acknowledge the anxiety that might be happening, right? But I think that, constructive constructive conversations to a degree. It's a fine line,
Mhm.
but it can be done to an extent. But I do think that Bernadette Davis and the article from BDC, her strategic group, is incredible.
Well, that's a great segue. That's actually this week's call to action. Thank you, Sandy. Check out this article by Bernadette Davis on keeping it civil, managing contentious conversations in the workplace. So we'll make sure that gets put in the show notes. Thank you for the wonderful segue. Sandy, tell folks how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, you can get in touch with me by, you can find me on LinkedIn, Sandy Diaz Haley, or you can go to my website, which is sdhcommunications.com, and I would love to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your tips today. And folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.